sort of nice pictures on here. So when I was doing a crowdfunding thing for one of our projects, and I did this workshop to raise money. It actually worked quite well. And I found this Picasso girl in a mirror picture. So that might just, as a bit of a warm up to thinking about how accurate and or distorted our body image is. And what we see in the mirror actually isn't what we look like either. We see what we're kind of used to seeing as well. And this has become really apparent to us because one of the projects we've got this visual feedback where people see themselves moving in real time, but it's not mirror. It's actually how they really are. And we got it from the Australian Dance Theatre. And when the dancers and with my clients, we've talked a lot about the difference between seeing this as a video in real time, then with all these enhancements versus a mirror. And it's really different. Like they say they get better feedback from this video feedback loop than a mirror, because mirror is different. It's on a wall or a screen. Yeah. No, it's not in a mirror image. It's actually their sides. So it's flipped. So, yes, yeah. Yeah. So it's quite weird. Yeah, projecting it. And then, of course, it captures images and freezes them so they can see where they've just moved from and now where they are and the trajectory in between. So that's one of the things. The other thing we can do is make a mirror of them, like make a vertical line and flip their right side onto their left side. And so one of my clients has got quite a dense hemiparesis with her arm. She has the most amazing thing. She just has to stand there. And so what she sees on the screen is actually two right sides. So when she does this arm can't move. But when she does this, she sees two arms going up. And she gets the most amazing feeling of warmth in her arm. So we have to, and her pain can go away. It's amazing. Because it's like a total whole body mirror box. But anyway. Okay, so that's that photo. It's a Picasso photo. So let's just say we've got a hypothesis that body image is the basis of who we are and how we act. So we have the next slide. Oh, sorry, there you go. We can take that slide out too. So it's incredibly complex. I think I start all my lectures with saying, well, it's incredibly complex and multidimensional. And you'll notice if I start waving my hands around, it usually means that's where it's so complex I don't know what to say, and it's just like, anyway. So we'll consider at least 4 ways to think about body image, as well as what we feel about our bodies, how we perceive them. So what we feel about our bodies, meaning what's our emotional connection to our bodies. How and why we perceive them, because we can relate to our body as if it's other, as opposed to us. And who is doing the perceiving, and what does this mean? And in here, what does this mean for us? So Jenny can put these slides up. You can have these slides. Okay. So one way from the literature, it's a very confusing literature because everybody kind of bandies around different kinds of terms like intertwining body schema with body image, and I think, as you'll see, they're not entirely the same thing, but nobody quite agrees on what they are. And self-image is then yeah, and certainly Feldenkrais thought it was an extension of. So the self-perception of the physical appearance of your body is one aspect of this. So how do you think that you look to outside observers? And we often do this in relation to an ideal. So when I first started teaching this workshop, I think I was teaching it in Perth, and I don't know where Sarah had advertised it, but we got a lot of psychologists working with people with body image issues, so dysmorphias, and also a couple of people with anorexia themselves in there. So this sort of, obviously this is really pertinent. Now, I think actually we've all got a version of this kind of dysmorphia, haven't we? When we've all got some funny thing about ourselves, about how we appear. the self-perception of the physical appearance. So it's a very complex construct, and it's influenced by a lot of different factors. You know, a lot of psychosocial factors, a lot of cultural factors. You know, I've been talking with a couple of people in the last couple of days about, you know, the chance remark that your dad made, or your first boyfriend made, or, you know, your mother made, or your best friend made, and this one little phrase that sticks in your head forever. Who, the 80, was it you? Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's not my confession. This lovely woman who does this elderly seniors dance class, and it's done mostly in the chair and standing. That's just to give you the context. And she said, "Oh, I really don't think I can do this anymore." And I said, "Why? Well, why not?" She said, "I'm really uncoordinated, and I've never really been very good at this." She said, "And my sister was always better than me." She said, I said, "So when did this happen?" She said, "Well, when I was 10, I was in ballet class, and my sister was always better, and I was always very uncoordinated." And I said, "So how old are you now?" She said, "I'm 84. I said, "I think maybe it's time to move on."
Yeah. So it's this, you know, something at 10, you know, and it just gets embedded in this complex self-image. Yeah, and then we live that, you know, that's what we live to, because that the perception then creates the behavior, as opposed to the behavior creating the perception, if that makes sense. And so this is what we're up against, is that people will have perceptions about themselves that they then enact that, even though it wasn't true in the first place, or whatever truth is. Anyway, okay, so next. So what is your idea of perfection? And so if we had a lot of time, we could, well, just quietly stop and think, what is your idea of a perfect body? We'll just stick with body image at the moment, just the image, like the physical appearance. And, you know, kind of have that morphed compared to how you think your body appears to other people. It doesn't take, I mean, most people have something that sticks out, so to speak. I always say that because my nose, I'm over it. Anyway, so next slide. So this is just my funny slide about that. You know, so we have these weird, you know, our perception is like these distorting mirrors, where we actually don't, we're not accurate around how we look to other people. You know, you might feel gangly. I'm often surprised at how tall I am. Like I look at somebody and I think, oh, they're tall. And I stand next to them, I'm as tall as them. I think, oh, that's unusual. You know, so I don't know if you all have those sorts of things. It's not a judgment. It's not that I feel bad being whatever, but it's just I'm often recalibrating. Nobody else has any weird things like that? No, you're all completely accurate. Next. So now there's a second way of thinking, and this is body schema, which is the sensory motor perspective. So this is this was alluded to in the Blakesley article that Zoran sent around for the homework, around this implicit map of positions, movement, and anthropometry of the body. So the anthropometry means sort of the length of the limbs and the, you know, the girth and all this sort of stuff. So anthropometrists are those sort of weird people that measure you, and, you know, you put calipers on your skin fat and all this kind of. There's a couple of them at work. They're just creepy anyway. But we do that. We have our own little internal sense of that, whether it's accurate or not. So this is not just about appearance, therefore. It's about mapping ourselves where we are in space. So at any given time, you are constantly updating this body schema so that you know whether you're sitting cross-legged or not. You don't have to look. You don't have to be told. You don't have to see a photo or have external feedback, that you know where you are. So obviously it's built up a lot from proprioception, but also a vision, so I know where my legs are as well, and I know where I'm moving, and I'm using my movement sensors, vision and touch and proprioception, to continually update this body schema. And I know where I am in relation to the environment. So it's my schema in relation to the overall schema and your schema. So schema means a set of rules. So I'm constantly updating this set of rules to produce this little, this sort of internal set of rules about where I am and what I'm doing in space. And we use this as a little simulation to plan out, what I talked a couple of days ago in the motor control stuff around making a plan for what we're going to do. So all the planning that we do in simulation, and remember I said the brain is predominantly a simulation device, it's working in the future most of the time, uses this set of rules, this body schema, to then predict what commands are needed to enact the next thing that I'm going to do. So it's not explicit and it's not conscious, whereas that appearance stuff is quite an idea. It's a sort of an appearance thing. So you move according to how you sense you are. If you feel stiff, then, but are you actually stiff? So this is when people, they'll have this sort of thing like, well, I'm a stiff person. So they have kind of bubbled this up into it. So they move like they are stiff. You've been see people moving like they haven't got a hip joint. They don't know that they've got a hip joint. They don't know that they haven't got a hip joint. It's not explicit to them. What we actually do in film crisis is kind of make them aware of it at some level, and then they get a hip joint. And that's what we're doing all the time in the ATM, is we're kind of actually paying attention to this and expanding it and being aware that we've just changed our experience of ourselves, or what the possibilities are.
When you were talking about mapping where you are in space and pre-planning and things like that, just say like a kid with ADHD or something, that they're flapping all the time and can't sit still or whatever, is that their sensory motor perspective a bit out of whack? Like they're not able to plan or sense where they are properly. So they're
it is
all the time.
So some kids with ADHD also have that vague pervasive coordination disorder that I talked about. We did a study with them, and it's not every kid with ADHD. Some of them are quite coordinated, but there's a big percentage who are not, and they have and their spatial awareness is pretty crap.
Yeah.
And often that's what the parents will say, is they bump into stuff all the time. They don't really know where they are in space and in relation to other things. And so there's been a lot of sort of experiments about, well, is it a perceptual, like they're not looking, they don't see? Is it a planning issue? Is it, where in that whole loop of things that I put up on the board are they breaking down? It seems like they break down almost everywhere, particularly the ADHD kids, the kids with ADHD. The ones who don't have ADHD but are still clumsy, I think this is probably where they're breaking down the most. They're not updating it. And we've done a couple of experiments with these kids that sort of would suggest that we're on the right track, in that when you test them on certain motor skills, they can do as well as a typically developing kid, but their variation is much wider. Yeah. So that to me says that they're not using feedback and they're not updating. And then there was one thing, we still haven't published it, bloody PhD students just slack of it anyway. What was interesting was we taught them a little dexterity task one day and they had to do it 2 days later. So the typically developing kids got better. So they were obviously updating themselves, and the motor learning stuff kicked in, and they consolidated that learning, and then the next time they're exposed to the task, they did it better. The kids with this coordination thing did worse. So that tells me again that it's probably this stuff, that they're not updating their plan and getting refined, and they're not laying down a good. But then, is that, you could say, is that the memory side of it? They're not remembering, but that's memory and learning is the same thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's a very long answer to what actually was a short question. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So, are you actually stiff, or do you act stiff? So, what's next? What's the next slide? Okay. So this is now I have quite a fantasy body schema. I think this is more body image. Yeah. Yeah, that's me. And in reality, what's the next slide? Yeah. Which leg am I standing on? Yeah, that's right. It's the standing leg and the jiggly leg, but he's differentiating because his head's going different to his pelvis. So that's, yeah, look, and why not? It's having a good time and whatever, isn't it? So, yeah, yes, they're both having a good time. Okay, so now there's another perspective on this, another facet to this, the way that we construct a body image overall, and this is the capacity to monitor their own internal state. And this is the more autonomic stuff that comes from, and I think we've talked about interoceptors before. So the internal state. Now, partly that's about movement, but it's also about our state of being. So it brings in other things. And again, it's not an explicit, when I say explicit, it's not particularly conscious. And we have these neural maps or that we base that perception on, but we can become aware of it, of our autonomic state. So I think we need to press the button again. So these are more the sort of visceral activities. So the autonomic sort of activities around, heart rate and respiration rate and, the state of our digestive systems. These are all the autonomic kind of regulated functions. Sweaty states, not sweaty states, dry skin states, hot, cold, etc. So this is another aspect of body image, isn't it? Well, we can say I feel hungry. We do say that in English, but actually in English we say I am hungry, whereas in French you say I have hunger. So it's quite it's a different language relationship to these homeostatic states. I have hunger. Yeah. And German as well, ich habe Hunger. Yeah. So the Europeans have these states, and us English, we live these states. I'm not saying anything's better than the other, but I don't know. Do you think that language is significant, or is it just me taking? Yeah. So what does, because I don't live in the European language, when you say I have hunger, do you relate to your hunger in a different way than when you're in English and you are hungry? That you physically, like I am hunger? Anybody else who's... Yeah.
So I never thought about it, but I think you go more what the people is talking rather than thinking. I never thought about it before.
Okay. What do you think, Anastasia? Yeah.
I have.
Yes. And what do you think?
Even with age.
Yeah.
In Italian, for instance, we say, I have 20 years of life.
Okay.
We don't say we're old. We're never old.
Right.
Yeah. So it is a different way of sensing yourself. Yeah. And the language does play a big role.
Yeah. Nice, Chuck.
Very nice. I think it makes a profound difference because if you say I am an asthmatic,
oh yeah,
it's an identity statement.
That's true. Yeah.
Whereas if I have asthma, I have much more option to do something about it.
Yeah. And I'm still trying to correct my language around people and defining populations by their diagnosis. And it's one of the things I take marks off in essays with the undergrads about talking about stroke people or, like people don't want to be identified by a diagnosis, by, an illness.
Well, some create a habit that supports certain secondary gains by identifying with a label.
Yeah.
But some of that needs to be unpicked to work out who's I and what options do I have and what can I address to enact differently.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Mm.
What's that? Yeah. Yeah. So that's the labels. You are nasty, or you're doing something that which is then saying I don't like you versus I don't like what you're doing. Yeah. Yes, Jenny's first point. Language is always important. Anyway, have a think. Anna. You guys are getting so good.
This is slightly off but on as well. Tibetans use their language. If you go, we go my car, my chair, my bag. They go, there is a car there for me. There is a chair there for me. Not mine.
Really?
It's not my. You don't own it like it's my chair. There's a chair there for me, or there's a bag there.
That's
for Tibetan.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's not mine.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's so it's collective, isn't it? Yeah. I wonder if we'll start doing that. Now that we've got all these things, like where I live, with all the bikes that you can just take, and there's the cars. There's a whole lot of cars around where I live. I've often thought maybe I should get rid of my car and just that. Then I could say that car's there for me. And beep 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 beep, and then get in and.
And I think that Indonesia doesn't have the future.
Indonesia doesn't have a future.
I think so. Or
Wow,
so
that's
they
big.
Always talk in past
In the now.
Present. Yeah. Amazing, different dimension.
Oh yeah, well, and we have too. All these future conditionals and this and that. Well, quite glad English is my first language. Anyway, so there's all of this. So this is part of building up another layer of who we are, how and what we sense about ourselves. What's next? So now the whole putting sort of this body image stuff. Therefore, how does Lotzie and Mosley sort of say this is actually more the affective part of it. I think for me, I think all of these things feed in to make the overall body image. How one's body feels to its owners. This is the affective, like how, the emotion maintained by ongoing, all the tactile, proprioceptive and visual stuff that we talked about, and the vestibular stuff, not possibly, definitely. And it's dynamic, so it's modulated by memory and belief and all the psychosocial factors. And when I say it's labile, it means it's really changeable, like really quickly. And how quickly can you change the way you feel about yourself? It can change like that, can't you? Think, you feel quite fine about things, and all of a sudden, you get this wave of hormones, and you go, oh, I'm a bit shitty, or whatever. It's very changeable.
Sorry, I just want to ask, do you think it operates in bandwidths though? So, sorry, it is changeable, but it's within a you can stretch it
so far,
can push it, but you can't completely.
Well, yes, I think that we have you could even
things.
argue that bandwidth is self-limiting, like like within the limits of. I can't dance. So that's where you actually restrict the bandwidth to something like that's not in my self-image to do that. And I think what we're doing in Feldenkrais is stretching
trying
that
to stretch it as much as possible.
And seeing what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
So that somebody who's always got this, the tendency that they always feel like they're on the heavy side, for example, or the heavy klutzy side, and then they'll get up from an ATM and they might feel light and graceful. And it's like, this is not in my self-image. This is not me. Like, who is this alien sort of thing? And then they might get rid of it because it doesn't fit, or they might stretch to accommodate that new sense of self. So I think, I think this is what we're pushing the boundaries of with people, and why it's, it can be a bit confronting. And it can be confronting for your family at home when they see you acting in a way that may be slightly different to what you normally do, and they go, what's this Feldy shit? I don't think that's happening as badly as it used to. Certainly in my training, there's a lot of stuff about, and because it was the sort of 80s leftover from the 70s, this kind of personal development, I'm going to transform myself. So there's a bit of that kind of nonsense still happening. But that was more an ego thing, I think. Anyway, that's me rambling.
Which of these images is, mental illness or mental variability, like someone with anxiety or depression or bipolar? Where does that?
I think they could influence any of these aspects.
Right.
Yeah.
They overlay the whole thing.
Yeah, I think they could disrupt anywhere. So So certainly here, you know, think about if you're in a vaguely depressed state, this changes. But then it will also change the homeostatic things because you go more vegetative and everything slows down. If you're in an anxious state, of course, it changes the way you feel about yourself. You might, you know, in terms of self-worth or something. However, from a homeostatic point of view, it might change things as well, and it might change the way you think you look to the outside world. You know, anxious people often very thin and jumpy, whatever, you know. So I think those states, those especially the affective disorders, could influence all of them. Absolutely. Isn't that great sort of cartoon about with Charlie Brown, something about, you know, yes, you know, and these 5 cent psychiatry.
Lucy.
That Lucy's offering, and, you know, basically she says sort of look up, because it's not a simple unidimensional thing that if I straighten up I'll feel happy. But if you all sit like that, it's very hard to have sorry? Yeah.
So personality, like just say someone who's a bit arrogant, you know, they think they're pretty good, but it's not so much a physical thing. They just think they know most things, you know, they're very confident.
Yeah.
But in this idea of not splitting mind and body particularly, is that personality sort of in here too?
The personality stuff there is, if you read, and I agree with him, the next set of lectures in the AY from Moshe, that's where the body image expands into self-image.
That's the difference between body image.
One of the extras. So it's not that they're different. It's the self-image has another layer in a way, or another couple of layers on top. That's how I see it. That's my view. It's not. Don't quote me. Well, you can quote me, but say it's me. It's not fiction. It's not fact. Probably fiction. So those sort of personality traits, which and you're absolutely right, they do manifest as physical behaviour as well. There is an arrogant posture. You know, there is posturing associated with arrogance, and actually, I think I said it last week. Sorry?
Trump walking in front of the Queen.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't see that. Leader of Montenegro. What did he do? He. Oh.
Trump.
All you can do is shake your head, isn't it? It just goes beyond belief, really. Yeah.
Going back a couple of comments, there was a mainstream movie made, which I didn't watch it because it looked bad, but there was this woman who was a young woman who was a bit overweight and very uncool and didn't have a boyfriend. And she had a fall, and she had some amnesia and memory loss. And when she came back to herself, she thought she was this hot, spunky kind of thing. You know, it's a mainstream movie. So she's strutting it around, and suddenly she's attracting the guys. You know, like that whole thing of how she perceived herself was completely different. Yeah. Her body was the same. Her life was completely different. I mean, I didn't watch it. It looked pretty bad, but it was exactly that concept, you know? Yeah. Just change how you feel and think about and perceive yourself. Yeah. Totally different life.
Yeah, it is. It's so intertwined. These things are so intertwined.
No, sorry, I should say I didn't read it, but I read a lot of critical stuff about it, because I think it's done by, I can't remember her name, comedian. I think she was trying to make the sort of points that we've been talking about. Yeah. But because it was a mainstream film and she is overweight, the audience couldn't get it in a way, because all they could see was her. And they thought, what is she doing? Doesn't she know? Doesn't she know she's fat? And so she was trying to
that's really interesting.
Make them awareness, them aware, because the opposite, which was Shallow Hal, but had Gwyneth Paltrow looking kind of gorgeous, pretending she was trying to do the opposite, And oh yeah, sure, right. Look at you. You know. So that movie didn't really work at all well. But this movie, she was trying to subvert the.
Yeah. Ah, that's fascinating.
Which is kind of interesting in terms of course, how much we absorb of ourselves and are reinforced. You were talking about people changing as part of the Feldenkrais course, but then that having problems when they took it out into the world. The world can be very forceful in terms of how it tries to keep you in its box. You know, you might think you're changing, but you still look the same to me, and I'm going to still treat you.
That's it's a really important point that we don't create this in isolation from the environment, which I think was in one of the things that Zoran sent around. I think there was something I remember in my training. Maybe I told you this story. It's the first FI I ever had was in the training, and I'm a really good slumper. Like I can slump super well. I can sink my chest in, and I'm very comfortable in here because I don't have to work, which is great. So I had this FI, and I stood up. Did I tell you this story? And it was like I was like this, and and I was a young woman. Whatever, and I was living in St Kilda. I had to walk across Fitzroy Street, which was, I don't know whether it still is, the Tomcat. It's the Tom district. I'd already been confused as being a prostitute there, like someone sort of asking what my fees were, sort of thing, walking home. So it wasn't a safe environment where I was walking from where I was living to the training and back, and our training was 12 till 6. So anyway, blah blah blah. So that's the context of it. Plus, it wasn't me, and I changed. And I know why the woman did it, because I was such a cynic. And I stood up, and she didn't tell me what was going to happen. I stood up, and I just kept on standing up, and my chest was up like this, and I was horrified. I said, I can't be like this. I can't go home like this. Like I can't get home like this. I think I could catch the tram home, but my boobs would touch everybody because they're out here, Like I actually had this feeling like my whole spatial dimensions and it was too much. And she just sort of smiled at me. She said, you can just do here. I went, oh, okay. All right. But she did it on purpose because she knew what I was. I was just this little know-it-all, and I was lying there going, oh, you're not doing anything, like this is bullshit. She could see it. I'm sure she could. Anyway. So she did this massively big change, and but she was smart enough to show me how I could go between. But it was this thing, it was too soon, and I couldn't, the thought of being in that environment like this, no way, too vulnerable. So it's, we have to watch for that a little bit.
And if you'd been going home to someone who liked to be more dominant than you, you could have come back with a black eye or a broken nose tomorrow.
Yeah, it's big. You can't, change is really, it's got to be negotiated. I think we're much more skillful now. I don't hear of these big changes anymore, particularly, and I think people have come into the method more gradually. Like, that was my first ever FI, and I was in that training environment, so you can imagine, like virgin territory. Anyway, okay, so how does your body feel to you? By the time I got back to Adelaide, my partner, it had gone, so he didn't care. And he was not a boob man anyway, so it doesn't matter. But doesn't matter. Anyway, but it's confronting. How does your body feel to you? So quietly think about it. What's your image of yourself, your body image, in one word? What would it be? Take your time. Whatever. I'm specifically not saying, this is a vague question. I like that, vague. License to be vague. Anybody? Yeah. Changing. Yep. Alive. Mm-hmm. Fat. I'm feeling fat. That's it. Good. Who? Little. Pardon? You don't have to say anything, by the way. But can you see that they're crossing a whole lot of different modalities that we've talked about? You know, like a physical state or a more mental state, or it could be crossing the two, or it could be just a purely somatic thing, or, you know, someone might have said, I feel dizzy. Or, you know, so some of you use more metaphorical things. So in any moment, we're traversing any one of or more of these layers. Do you see what I mean? Some of you are putting an ing on the end of it, so you're recognizing that it's changing anyway. Okay. So what language do you use? What senses are you tapping into or not? What external factors can be distorted by any change in the previous paradigms? So, you know, any shift like that. Okay. Yeah.
Like just like skipping on to that, like on that language thing before about like identifying, and it's like, because on the other hand, like, you know, being hungry or being like anger or whatever it is, or, you know, not being apart from it and being like just the unity of those two, it's that doesn't trouble too much if as long as you have that sort of notion that it's going to change, like it's going to pass, as long as it's going to pass. And same with like environmental context too, because it can be really overwhelming. But if you also know that you are the environment as well, and the environment's changing all the time, then it, you know, it gives a bit of freedom and space with that, you know, whether it be this sort of language or that sort of language, just having that sort of embedded in whatever way you put it, you know.
And the sense that it can change, you know. There's one of my clients that she's written it down in her diary, this too shall pass. Because when she's in pain, she thinks that she's a pain patient. She becomes a pain patient, and she concretizes it. She turns it into, this is who I am and what I am forever, full stop. It's not changing. And that's her perception, that it's permanent, you know. It's not, and it's concrete. And that's how she identifies, and there's no other room in her identity except for that. So now she's got written in her diary, and this too shall pass. Like the pain will change again. So the recognizing that anything can change, and I think it's you know, you said something about I am angry. In English, I am angry. Like it's part of me. Well, that's really hard. Is there other languages that I have anger? So if I have it, then I can lose it. But if I am, it's quite sad, really, isn't it?
But at the same time, it's quite courageous too, you know. It's sort of owning to that. And while it's there, you are that. It is you, and it's there. As long as there's that, also that notion, you're not rigidly that it will pass. But you know that even in a way can help it sort of pass, because
you acknowledge that it's there, like you acknowledge that the pain's there,
but just not to be like I am this, you know, and that's
forever,
forever. That's, you know,
that's the key. I think that is really, and in saying that, there's a balance, because if people then can lose their sense of identity, they don't know who they are. If it's changing too much and they don't know who they are, they've lost the ground in a way. That's not good either, is it? So it's this balance between, I have enough of an identity that I can recognize, but I can change it in a way that I can keep up with myself. Yeah.
I was just going to say, just in addition to that, I've obviously, and probably communicated the fact that I feel my self-image is busted, because I've been busted for ages.
Yeah.
I still am busted.
Yeah.
But I must admit, even through this segment and actually being here on a Friday at the second week means I can actually improve. Albeit slowly. So, I'm sure I'll return, but hopefully with less longevity. There hasn't been for a while.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Susan, you are using identity,
You are using identity.
Identity?
Yes, word identity. And anyway, this word is with me for the last probably few years. Really ask people and try to identify what is identity.
What is it? Yeah.
What is it philosophically, and anyone, and you and Jenny, what do you think? What is the definition, your definition of identity, and the correlation between identity, body image, self-image, and...
So I would think, I mean, it's a big question, but the short answer is for us here, self-image is identity. It's what we identify with and the aspects that we construct an identity. And the whole point of it is that it's all a construct. We construct it. And if we can construct it, we can deconstruct it and change it. So I think all of these things, you could substitute the word identity. All of these things feed into identity or self-image. Yeah, I would use those words vaguely synonymously. Yeah.
Thank you.
But we do need to move on. Sorry, there's a lot. It's great chat, but if we could, otherwise we're chatting all day. Sorry to put you off, but go.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, I was just one thing about the language as well.
Yeah.
I was just doing this with my kids at the moment, where there's there's I am angry or I'm feeling angry, but there's also the you're making me angry, or such and such, that maybe it comes down to the sense of ownership, like these clothes make me feel fat, or
yeah. It is. It's these are important things. So let's keep going, and then maybe I'll answer some of your questions. And I'm sorry to stop the comments because they're really rich, but we've got curriculum, haven't we? All right. So there's other aspects to the way we continue to construct this thing, this identity, and the self-identification is how do I identify with this self? So this comes from a guy called Jean Aurore, who's actually a neurophysiologist, I think. I can't remember. Yeah, it's French, obviously. So associated with how we feel about ourselves, this self-identification, there's two other senses. And one is the sense of ownership. And this can be quite concrete, actually. Like I own all my body parts. And it sounds really weird. But again, I work with people who don't. Often through stroke. So there's a syndrome called neglect, where they no longer have a left arm, for example. It's not theirs. And when they wake up, from the stroke in the early days, they will scream because there's something in their bed and it's not theirs. It can be really profound. Now, generally it gets better than that. So they cognitively know, they intellectually know that that's their arm, but it's not theirs really. And this is always on a spectrum, you have parts of yourself that you don't own as well as the other parts. It's probably related to the way you feel about them as well, but that you don't identify as much. So that and again, in Feldenkrais, what we're doing is really owning stuff. We're becoming more aware of different body parts that we weren't aware of, that were maybe a bit vague in the ownership stakes, and then we own them a bit more. So we're completing that. We're making it a more complete identity. Without the gaps, if you like. So there's the sense of ownership. Now, there's a meta thing about ownership as well, and it's one that bugs me to death. And one of the Feldenkrais practitioners, Adelaide, who's also a fine artist, she does a lot of artist-in-residence stuff, and one that she did years ago was in the medical school at Flinders University. And she was really interested to see that this sense of ownership of bodies, she noticed that the medical students were already starting to own bodies and be the boss of them right from the start of dissection. So she was working in the dissection room. And even then, there was this sense that somebody else, has ownership over those bodies. And then she was kind of tracking it through their training. And it's true for a lot of health professionals. I'm not just having a pop at medical practitioners, because I hear, massage therapists, physios, chiropractors, that chiropractor saying you will only lie on your back, basically. Who owns that body? To talk like that, who owns the body? You know, where's the power around that? Who gets to make the decision about the body? So I think we can look at this very specifically from an internal perspective. But that woman gave up her body. You know, like the chiropractor didn't necessarily just take it. The woman gave it up, gave the authority. And that's what Catherine was really interested in. Obviously, the cadavers had given their body, literally given their body to science. But she was really interested in tracking that sense of, as patients, we hand over our bodies, we hand over the authority. Now, in Feldenkrais, we don't do that. It's opposite. If people want to hand over their bodies, we go, I don't want that, you know. Well, FI, it can get a bit blurry. How do you ensure that your clients get up from the FI table? Or in ATM, it's much easier. They get up and they own it because you've never asked for it. FI, a little bit trickier. How do we really have this sense of, this is still your body? We're having a conversation and we're a system. This is still you and this is me. And I don't own you and I'm not the boss of you. Getting back to your kids, I'm not the boss of you. Like, you know, what do you own? So the second sense is the sense of agency. And we've probably heard us talking about this, is that this is the, I understand the body I identify with is also the agent of my actions. So when I ask you, what is it good for? What I'm getting at is what, in a movement sense, what do you now have agency over? But also you can think about it in terms of different body parts. And again, if this was a long workshop, I get people to lie down and think about their hand. What is your hand good for? What does it have agency for? Now you're exploring agency in terms of standing. Which leg has more agency for standing? Which leg might have more agency for being free or kicking or something like this? So we're actually exploring agency in relation to different organisations and what postures, movements, organisations of ourselves, more appropriately, what are they good for? What does this give us agency for? Does that make sense? So this is a really important sense. Now, if you are the agent so the woman that Philippa was talking about dancing, she had no sense of agency for dance. Her body, her self-image, any aspect of herself couldn't entertain that she had an agency for dancing. So how do we work around changing somebody's sense of agency, opening up their possibilities? So is it like sense of capability? Yes. Yeah, and the agency is often for specific functions. So you could say there's some pervasive states that I am the agent of my own actions as any action. But often this sense of agency is quite specific. Like my left hand is really good at gesturing. My right hand is really good at writing. You know, that's what it's good for. My right leg is really good for standing. That sort of thing. So it can be that body part kind of level, but the way we would probably look at it more is in terms of an organisation.
It seems when we've been doing the seniors ATMs, and it seems that sense of agency, there's the self-image and their self-agency becomes fixed. It's very it's not that it can't shift or it doesn't shift, but they come in with, many people have such a fixed idea of what they are capable of doing.
Yeah.
Even if it's clear to them that they're actually doing the thing that they say they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of very interesting.
It is. It's really, and this is, can you see this is the same as identity? So if I have the identity of, it's the same word in that, from this experiential point of view. Can be protective. It can be defining. You know, like I might say I'm really crap at maths and I'm quite proud of it because I don't want to do it. Or something. So our body image is of an acting self. This is the important thing. It's not a static. The whole putting this together, this who we are in our bodies is in action. And Feldenkrais knew that, and so he used the word potent as a sort of a generic agency. Do you feel potent, which is capable, capacity, capability, those kinds of words, which is why we link it to function and action in the real world. It's not a simple feel-good thing. Otherwise, we'd just take amphetamines. Or not. So sensing the agent. So let's do something. Lie on your back, just wherever you can, if you don't mind, or you can go to your mat if you want to. So now, look at you lying on your rolly mat. It's lovely, right? You haven't done the roller segment. Oh, you did the roller segment with Stephanie, did you? No, she's coming back to do the rolling. It's a whole series of work on rollers. All right. Now, in your imagination only, slowly get up off the floor. In your imagination only, get up off the floor. Okay, so as you're lying there, I'm going to list out some body parts, and which was the most clear in your imagination and which was missing. Okay, so let's go. Foot, left foot. Was that clear in your internal representation of yourself? Left foot? So, was that part of your imagination sequence? Right foot. Sacrum. Belly button. So your belly. The top of your sternum. Left thumb. Right elbow. Right scapula. Left ear. Chin. Now, some of those don't have a lot of agency in the function of getting up, do they? So that maybe there wasn't any need to sense them. But if you go back into your imagination, can you put them into that sense of self as you come up to standing? Any of those things. So there's an efficiency about the way we sense ourselves, but it's very habitual. And this is what we're playing with in Feldenkrais. Is that maybe if you're aware of more other parts of you that could have agency, then you might get up off the floor quicker. And again, if you think about that elderly citizen lesson where he gets people up from sitting down to lying and back up again, he's slowly adding in more bits to their body image, isn't he? So more about, at first there's no leg stuff. It's all about the left arm coming across the body and going onto the floor, and then he adds in the head turning, and then he adds in the knees softening and bending up. So maybe go through that sequence and come up to sitting, and we'll continue on. Okay, so some of this next bit should be a bit familiar because it's in the Blakesley article, and Zoran's the AY24 lesson, it talks a little bit about the homunculus. So M1 is the primary motor cortex and S1 is the primary sensory cortex, and they run kind of parallel to each other. The motor strips in front and it's like the headband here, and then the sensory one is immediately behind it, running like this, like where my hands are. So cortex means sort of outer. And they're the best known parts of the brain that are like topographical, they're representational. So different parts of the brain kind of represent different parts of the body. So the homunculi, so there's a motor homunculus and a sensory homunculus. And so I think maybe I've got a picture. There we go. So say up the top, that's looking at the brain from the left-hand side. And you can see it's got S1 there is the shaded out part. So that's the primary sensory cortex, and the primary motor cortex is right in front of it. Now the bottom picture is sliced through the brain like this way from left to right. And so we're looking at that, the inside of the brain from the top. So where it says hip and trunk, that's right at the top here. And then down in that central sulcus, the central dip, is the leg and the foot and the toes and the genitals down in there. And then coming around, you can see that, so the little man, homunculus means little man. I'm not being gendered on purpose. It's just the Latin. The little person, it would be a little woman if you're a woman, well, depending on what your genitals are. And then shoulder, arm, elbow, forearm, wrist, hand, little finger, ring, middle, index, thumb, like that, all in those clumps. And then the eyes, nose, face, upper lip, lips, lower lip, teeth, gums, jaw, tongue, etc. And then sensing around more visceral stuff is sort of coming underneath. So that's the sensory homunculus, and the motor homunculus is the same. So we say somatotopically organised. However, the motor homunculus doesn't have genitals in there because genitals aren't dexterous. They don't move. They are moved by other bits. So that's sort of the difference, but the proportions are roughly the same. So the things that move the most dexterously have the most sensation, apart from the genitals. And that makes sense. So the lips and the tongue are incredibly dexterous, so they're not only really good at moving, they're really good at sensing. And the thumb and the fingers, really good at moving, really good at sensing. So this tells you sensing is really important for quality movement, coordinated, efficient movement. What is there anything else that surprises you there? So you can see roughly where they are, and then these things. And then remember, I said it's in this sort of cortex that we have this cortical rivalry. It's called. So if I use my thumb a lot and don't use my finger, so this finger for me, I smashed it in a door and lost my fingernail. So it was black and it went numb, and because I couldn't use my finger. So if I had done an MEP on my brain, for sure, that part of my finger would be quite small in that little, index finger territory. And my thumb and this finger would have got both more dexterous and more sensing, would have had more firepower in both parts of my brain. Now my nail has grown back and it doesn't hurt anymore, and I use it, and I even bit it the other day. I was so happy. If I can bite my fingernail, then it means I'm back on track. And so its representation in my cortex, sensory and motor, would now be back to how it was because I'm using it again. But, for 4 months it was stuck up in the air like this.
So the circle, the little circle is actually the head.
Yeah.
And face.
Yeah.
So all the sensory things. We're talking about the head.
Just the head, yeah. Yeah. It's not very sensate. Okay, so that's. Oh, so was that just one other? Sorry, was there another dot point on the bottom that I didn't talk to? I can't remember. Okay, I thought I had a picture of the actual homunculus in proportion, but anyway. So the homunculus, the sensory homunculus and the motor homunculus, is not the only part of the brain. So those the M1 and S1 aren't the only areas that if you zap them, it will correspond to a certain body part. But like the article says, if you zap in that area, it only will stimulate. It won't stimulate a function. It will just stimulate, in a funny movement kind of. It won't be a whole movement. It will be just a twitch or something like that. There has been some experiments where they stimulate the whole kind of cone going from the cortex in, and they might get like a reach movement, like a multi-joint movement, but they haven't been replicated that much anyway. But there are other representationally organised structures in the sensory motor system. So the secondary somatosensory cortex, I don't know if you remember from the picture before, that's just behind. It's called S2. And the interesting thing about the brain is that it's an association area in a way. Now, and association areas they're often the areas that are in between, like the somatosensory cortex and the visual cortex. There's the association areas in between. And the association areas between these different kinds of big sensory modalities in the brain are actually bigger than the primary areas, which makes you think structurally what our brain is spending a lot of time doing is making associations, integrating senses so that we are not unimodal sensing. We are almost always multimodal, multi-sensory in our processing because we put sensations together to make a bigger picture. So the secondary somatosensory cortex is quite different. So in S1, this side, this strip, senses this side of the body because the tracks path, so that cross. So the sensations coming from this side of the body come up the spinal cord, cross over and go to the left hemisphere, and then the left side of the body goes to the right hemisphere. And the same with the motor. Instructions from the right M1 go to the left side of the body, and the left M1 goes to the right side of the body. S2 is different. It puts the whole body together. So it takes information from S1 on both sides and creates a whole person. So it's bilateral, has bilateral representations. It gets sensation from both sides. So it crosses. So it's important. And it provides this interface between vision, which is the primary visual cortex is at the back, and the primary hearing cortex is in the temporal lobes here. So it interfaces with those for this multimodal sort of, some people call it sensory integration. Probably the better term is convergence. So we converge senses together to make sense of something. And then the premotor cortex, so that's in front of the motor cortex in here, and also has the supplementary motor cortex is there, and they're bilateral as well, and they do the planning. So we plan in a bilateral way. We don't both sides together. The instructions come from a unilateral, one-sided to the other side, but the planning is both sides. So the brain is constantly sort of doing this flicking between the whole self-sided, whole self-sided. Quite interesting. Okay. But those areas have a topographical kind of organisation as well, in that there's a corresponding sorts of regions with body parts in a way.
Is there a neurological rationale as to why it is how it is? Is it like a protective mechanism or something?
Oh, to have the hemispheric crossing? Not that I know of. There is an enormous amount of debate about how from a neurodevelopmental point of view, how the hell does that get set up? So there's a lot of research going into trying to predict why neurons. So the neurons come, we start off with our two little cells coming together, the male cell and the female one coming together. And then out of that, all these cells start differentiating and we get this little set of neural stem cells, basically. And then they form a little tube and then they roll up. So then we get the spinal cord and then they fold over each other and we get the brain at the top. Then what makes neurons migrate to this? So that, these neurons migrate and the cell bodies go here, but the axons cross and go down to the other side. So, the way it happens is there's a genetic program that sends them like that. And then there's these sort of chemical environments that the neuron seeks, these kind of chemical environments that kind of entice it to go, but why? Yeah, most cross. Yeah. However, ours is the most complicated, and it has the most weird wirings up, and the biggest association areas over the biggest cortex, biggest neocortex. So we have a stronger sense of identity because that's pulled together a lot in the frontal lobes in terms of personality and behaviour traits and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think there are most brains are hemispheric, like they have two sides, and they develop in two sides. And there's that weird thing about dolphins can switch off one side when they sleep. One side goes to sleep and then the other side goes to sleep. Yeah. So maybe that's the answer. Yeah. Yeah.
Are dolphins' brains bigger than ours?
No.
Birds' brains are small, but they're smart as. So size is not everything.
Well, men's brains are bigger than women's, so.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll pause here because you can draw your own homunculus. Actually, do you want to do this now, or do you want to do it after the tea break? Tea break. You feel thirsty. I am thirsty. You look thirsty.